Hey, how's it going? In this video, we are going to review the mighty Cabri G2 after flying it for 500 hours.
That's like autopilot, dude.
How do you fly a helicopter? Well, I'm going to show you.
So at this point, I've got over 500 hours in the Cabri G2, and I recently went out to the instructor training course where we got to learn a whole bunch of new things about the Cabri and demonstrate some cool things about it. So I'd say I've got like a pretty good knowledge about it and pretty good experience about it. So in this video, we are going to go over just 6 thoughts I have about the Cabri after flying it for as many hours as I have. So the first point, and arguably the most important point when I talk about the Cabri G2 and how I feel about it, is it's so safe. I feel incredibly safe flying the Cabri G2. So just for a quick context, I came from the Robinson R22. I did my primary training in that. I also have about 300 or 400 hours in the Robinson R44. So I came from the Robinson family, and then the next platform I flew was the Cabri. So when I compare the Robinson R22 and the Cabri G2, I just feel so much safer. The most obvious reason why it feels like a safer helicopter is those 3 blades and an articulated rotor system. The biggest problem with the Robinson helicopters, and they're really great helicopters, but the biggest problem with them is that they have 2 blades. You can get into low G mass bumping, and that rotor system design has caused a lot of accidents. Now with a 3-bladed articulated rotor system, of course you can still have problems, but you cannot get into low G mass bumping, and I just feel so much safer. I feel safer knowing that if my student does something dumb like jab the cyclic forward, or if we're in really strong wind and turbulence, that the rotor system is not going to tear itself apart and we're not going to have a problem in that way. And going along with the rotor system and the blades is, since it has 3 blades and those blades are pretty heavy, it has a ton of rotor inertia. When you're doing an auto rotation, when you practice auto rotations, there's so much RPM and there's so much weight in that rotor system that your RPMs don't fluctuate like they would in a Robinson R22. When you enter an auto rotation, you don't have to lower the collective and then bump it up or raise it up immediately to prevent an overspeed. My entire time flying the Cabri, I've never been close to overspeeding it. Even like aggressive turns in an auto rotation or really hard flare, you can get the RPMs high, but you're never going to overspeed it like you do in a Robinson R22. And in an auto rotation, your RPMs don't fluctuate nearly as fast. They will climb, they will drop, but in an R22 or an R44, they climb and drop super fast. So you're having to work pretty hard, and it's a lot safer. And when I send my students solo out in the Cabri G2, I just feel like if their engine were to fail for some reason, if they get that collective down, they're going to be fine. They're not going to have to worry about the RPMs getting too low. You know, you just basically just drop the collective all the way down and you set it and forget it, and you don't have to worry about overspeeds or anything. So I just feel a lot safer in it myself flying and when I send students out in it. So point number 2 I love about the Cabri G2 is the amount of fuel you can carry. So the Cabri G2 has a total fuel capacity of 45 gallons. Now, even when I get a top off of 100 low lead, I don't think I've ever seen it actually to 45. It doesn't have that entire amount of fuel as usable fuel, but like when I top it off, it's usually at like 42 gallons of fuel, and 42 gallons of fuel is a massive amount of fuel. When you're only burning anywhere from like 8 to 10 gallons of fuel per hour, and you can carry up to like 42 gallons of fuel, that makes a major difference. When I'm going on cross countries with students, I know that I can carry quite a bit of fuel and I'm not gonna have to worry about it as much. Obviously you're still worried about fuel, but you just can do so much more. Especially when you're solo, if you top that off, you can go for 3 or 4 hours without a problem. I mean, it just keeps going. And like if you're on a cross country and you're burning 8 gallons an hour, it's just an insane amount of fuel, and it's a big difference in comparison to the Robinson R22. Okay, so point 3 about the Cabri G2, and I mean, this is like a pro and con, is the Fenestron tail rotor. Now the Fenestron tail rotor, I think it just looks cooler, but there's a couple different like practical parts about it that I want to talk about. So first off, it is kind of odd to get used to. So in a conventional tail rotor, you pretty much have the same tail rotor authority that matches the main rotor. So if you've got a lot of main rotor RPM, you're gonna have a lot of tail rotor authority. As your main rotor RPM decays, your tail rotor kind of decays with it. In the Fenestron tail rotor, you still have tons of tail rotor authority, but it's not the exact same, and you kind of have to know how it works. The biggest thing that I learned is like it's not as tight as like a conventional tail rotor. So like with a conventional tail rotor, pretty minimal inputs to get the nose to do what you want. In the Fenestron, you have to make pretty big movements. So you're going from quite a bit of left pedal to quite a bit of right pedal. Like if you're coming in on approach, you're basically neutral or maybe a little bit of left pedal, and then as you raise collective and increase your torque, you need quite a bit of right pedal. If you're just a student and you don't know anything else, if you've only flown on the Cabri, it's like super normal. But if you're switching from like a Robinson with a conventional tail rotor into the Fenestron tail rotor, it's a little bit interesting to get used to, and a lot of people think, oh, I don't have the right amount of tail rotor authority, or I don't have the same amount of tail rotor authority. But you do. You just have to use more, and it's like more throw of the tail or of the pedals. So I've never had a problem with running out of tail rotor authority. I can still control the yaw just as good as you would in any other helicopter, but I love the Fenestron tail rotor because I'm not super worried. I'm not constantly thinking about people walking into the tail rotor. Now, in all honesty, there's not too many times where I'm having people get in and out of the helicopter while the blades are spinning. That's not like a super common occurrence, but when it does happen, very grateful that I've got that Fenestron behind me, that it's shrouded, it's protected, and even if someone were to happen to walk backwards, which I would direct them not to do, I'm not worried about them walking into the tail rotor and hurting themselves. And along with that, since it is a shrouded, protected tail rotor, I'm not worried about like a phone flying out the window into the tail rotor, or even necessarily like a bird taking out the tail rotor, because it is protected and enclosed. So if things move down the body of the helicopter, there's nothing to hit, they'll just continue along. So I think it is a great design, and along with the point that I said, I've never felt like I've run out of tail rotor authority, there's very little cons and so many pros, and I think that just makes the helicopter even so much safer. So point number 4 about the Cabri that I really enjoy is, since it's a newer helicopter, they have integrated technology into it, and then you've got that EPM, that electronic pilot monitor, so you've got a ton of information and it's really easy to read. But the best part about it is on the left hand side, you've got your power sensor. So this takes your manifold pressure, your outside air temperature, and a couple other variables, and it spits out the amount of power you're pulling and the amount of power you can pull. So coming from the Robinsons, you just have that manifold pressure, and it's kind of an odd way to look at power. I mean, it is just how hard the engine's working. To convert that information to like an easy percentage to read, so like while you're hovering, you're like pulling like 75 or 80% power, and then you're in a climb and you're pulling like 85 or 90 or 95% power or 100% power, and then you know that's your limit, just a percentage. So manifold pressure is fine and it works, but to have all that variables calculated and spit out into a number of how hard the engine's working is really awesome. Along with that screen, one thing that I have absolutely loved about having that is you've got your fuel on the right hand side, so it tells you how much fuel you have in gallons, which ticks away, which is really nice, so you're not just looking at a gauge, but it also calculates how much flight time you have. So as you're flying along, if you pull more power, your flight time will decrease. If you're like using like a lower power setting, your flight time increases. But it says, okay, you've got an hour and 32 minutes of flight time remaining at this power setting. So you know, if your destination, you can calculate your fuel and your distance a lot easier. It just tells you like legitimately how much fuel you have at that power setting, which is like, I mean, it's the way helicopters and technology should be. I'm not dissing Robinsons because I've got tons of time and I love them, but it's like the logical progression. It's what you want. It's the safe way to operate. You just know how much fuel and how much flight time you have, which is great. Point number 5 is I really like the automatic carb heat. There's like a hot setting, a cold setting, and you pretty much just leave it in auto at all times while you're flying. And it's just really nice with that. You don't have to think about it like in the Robinson R22, you're constantly adjusting that, even though it does kind of have that auto carb heat when you lower collective, you're still manipulating it. But with the Cabri, you literally just leave it in auto and it does the work, and you can kind of see the temperature. All right, and the final point that I love about it is just the overall design. I think it looks really cool. I think it's a great looking helicopter, but with the design thing, the biggest thing is that center cyclic. You know, having a center cyclic is awesome. I don't miss the T-bar, and I also don't dislike it. It's fine. That T-bar in the Robinsons, but it's a little bit weird. But having that center cyclic, it's more approachable. It's what a helicopter should look like. It's really nice to fly. It feels good. I'm not constantly messing with this bar and handing it over, trying to hold it up here. It's just nice to have the controls right there. And this is like a final point. It's not on the list, but this is just like an experience I've noticed as a flight instructor coming from the R22 and the R44 into the Cabri G2. I noticed students are able to fly it easier and quicker. It's just a very light helicopter. It's very agile, and I mean, that's hard. It's hard to learn how to fly any helicopter, but I've noticed students pick up the Cabri easier. They're able to hover it a little bit easier. Maybe that's because it's a heavier rotor system and maybe a little bit of a heavier helicopter, but I just noticed that they're able to pick it up a little bit easier. They're able to understand the cyclic better. They're not trying to rotate that T-bar. It's a better design, I think. All right, so let me know what you think. I love the Cabri. I love Robinson helicopters too, but I think the Cabri is a better helicopter. It's an honor to get to fly it. I love flying it. It's a wonderful machine. I want to hear what you think. Do you disagree with my list? Is there anything that I missed? Do you have any questions about it? Let me know down in the comments below. Go check me out on Patreon if the link is down below if you want to support the channel. Subscribe for all kinds of helicopter content, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.